Today, we're going to be talking about exercising. And no, not these guns, maybe another day. Instead, we're going to be talking about exercising versus closing an option and which one you should do. Welcome back to Everything Options. My name is Greg, and today we're going to be talking about exercising versus closing options. So to break this video down for you, first I'm going to cover the basics on what exercising an option actually does. Then I'm going to give you a few scenarios why you might want to exercise an option. And finally, at the end of this video, I'm going to talk about why you probably shouldn't exercise an option in most cases and why you should close out instead. And this video is going to be a bit longer because I have a lot of knowledge to share on this topic. So check out the chapters down below, leave a like if you learned something, and comment what you want to see next. So the basics of exercising an option. Whenever you open an option, you're signing an agreement. It's kind of like signing on a house, but usually options don't cost north of $300,000 and they're not pricing me out of the market. Whenever you open an option though, you're either agreeing to buy or you're agreeing to sell 100 shares of your stock at your strike price. And there's two ways that you can open an option. You can either buy it or you can sell it. And whenever you buy a call option, you're agreeing to buy 100 shares of your stock at your strike price. So if I were to buy a $100 call option, I'm agreeing to buy 100 shares of the stock at $100. In each transaction, there is both a buyer and a seller. For the person who bought the call, they're agreeing to buy 100 shares of the stock, and they have the right to exercise the option to buy 100 shares of the stock anytime before the expiration, whereas the person who sold the option has the obligation to sell 100 shares to the buyer at any time before the expiration date, and on the expiration date, of course. And whenever it comes to exercising early, this is a one-sided decision. But who gets to make it? Well, the buyer has the right to buy 100 shares at $100 for an option. So since they have the right, it's in their hands. It's their decision. Usually, it's a pretty bad idea, and you almost never want to exercise your options early, but there are a few scenarios that you need to know about to where you might want to exercise your option. And here they are. Number one, when the bid ask is extremely wide. You're probably thinking, what the hell is a bid ask? Well, the bid price is just the price that buyers are willing to pay for an option, and the ask price is what sellers are willing to sell the option for. And usually, just like with any other binary decision, humans can't really agree with each other. Hence, the bid ask, also known as the bid ask spread. This is the difference between what buyers are willing to pay for the option versus what sellers are willing to sell the option for, simply put. Usually whenever the bid ask is extremely wide, this is because of low volume, because when there's less people to negotiate, just like in the Senate, decisions just don't get made. And sometimes we can be so bad at making decisions that the bid ask can be detrimental, especially for people that are buying the options to open them. Let's say, for instance, buyers want to buy an option for $100, but sellers aren't willing to sell their option for anything less than $400. That means between the asking price and the bid price, there is a $300 difference. And I would hate to be in this option, especially as a buyer, because the longer that you hold your option, because you can't sell it, the more time value is going to kind of evaporate out of your option as time goes by. That's called extrinsic value. And options are made up of two types of value: extrinsic value, like we just talked about, and also intrinsic value for in-the-money options. And you'll never, I repeat, never want to exercise an out-of-the-money option. We'll talk about that later, but for in-the-money options, you can exercise them, and here's why you might want to. For example, if you buy a call option on XYZ stock with a $100 strike price and XYZ is going for $105, but the people that are buying the option from you, whenever you want to close out of it by selling it, if they're not willing to pay you more than $500, say they're only willing to pay you $400 for your option, it's better to exercise that option, buy the 100 shares at $100 and sell them at the 105 market price, than to sell your option for $400 to the bidders. This means that you'll have made $100 more by exercising your option and selling those 100 shares at the market price than if you were to have just sold the option to the $400 buyer. And I don't know about you, but $100 is $100. That's a whole lot of McChickens. I would say 100, but I think they're like $1.15 right now, and I'm too lazy to do the math. Anyway, it makes sense for you to want to exercise your option to buy 100 shares at $100 and sell them at the 105 market price than to sell your option for $400. This is rare, but it can happen. And another rare case that you might want to exercise an option is related to dividend stocks. Sometimes the dividend payout that's about to come out and the intrinsic value can be worth more than what bidders are willing to pay for your option. Again, this is probably going to be due to low volume, which I'd say is probably more prevalent among dividend stocks, especially in the market that we're in right now that's highly focused on growth stocks. So because of this, usually the volume on dividend stocks for their option chain is going to be a lot lower than a high growth stock because there's generally a lot more interest in the high growth stocks as of right now than in dividend stocks. And because of this, again, the bid-ask spread could be extremely wide to the point where it makes more sense to exercise your option versus closing out of it. So let's say that you have the same stock and the same option as earlier with XYZ trading at $105. You bought a $100 call option, but now XYZ is about to pay out a 2% dividend. If you were to own 100 shares of XYZ and it's paying out a 2% dividend and it's trading at $105, you're going to be paid a $210 dividend on the ex-dividend date. If you add that to the $500 of intrinsic value, in theory, this option should be going for at least $710. But remember, our buyer was only willing to pay us $400 earlier, so in this case, we would make $310 more from exercising these options, waiting until the next dividend date to get our dividend, and then selling the options right after than if we were to have closed out of our option and sold it to the person that was only willing to pay us $400. And $310 is a whole lot of McChickens. And finally, the last time where you might want to exercise an option is if some asshole decides to exercise on you. And I'm not talking about somebody stealing your bench press. I'm talking about spreads, specifically option spread. Whenever you open a spread, really of any type, you're both buying and you're selling an option. And whenever you sell an option, you're under the obligation to either buy or sell 100 shares of your stock, whereas the buyer for your option has the right to exercise before the expiration date. This means that if you sold a $100 call and your option goes in the money, you're obligated to sell 100 shares of your stock at your $100 strike price. And if you don't own those shares, here's what you're going to have to do. Whenever the buyer decides to exercise their end of the option early, you're going to be assigned to sell 100 shares at your strike price of $100. That means if you don't have the 100 shares to cover that, you're going to have to exercise the option that you bought in your spread. Remember, we both bought and we sold an option, so maybe we bought a $99 call. That means we're agreeing to buy 100 shares at $99, and whenever we sold our $100 call, we agreed to sell 100 shares at $100. So from the difference between the two strike prices, $100 and $99, there's a $1 spread. You multiply that by the 100 shares that you're controlling in your spread for a $100 difference, and in this case, you should be at a profit actually. Your broker should notify you if your option does get assigned early from the buyer exercising their right to buy 100 shares of a stock and you having to sell your 100 shares of a stock. And if you don't own that, you're just going to have to exercise the option that you bought in your spread. And these are really the only scenarios that I can think of as to where you might want to exercise an option. But in most cases, you probably don't want to exercise an option. You probably want to close it out instead, and here's why. Whenever you exercise an option, you're giving up all of the extrinsic time value that's still left in your option. This is basically like letting your option expire, but instead of waiting out all that time until the expiration day, you're making it happen immediately. This means with our example from earlier with XYZ trading at $105, if we bought a $100 strike price call option and the bid-ask spread isn't as wide as the Mariana Trench and maybe the buyer is willing to pay us $1,000 to close out of our option, it would make more sense to sell the option to close it to the buyer than to exercise the option and then sell the 100 shares at the market price. If you were to do that, you'd be buying 100 shares at $100 and then you would sell the shares at the 105 market price. So in this case, you would only make $500 versus if you were to have sold the option to the person that was willing to pay you $1,000, you would have made $1,000. So basically, you just played yourself and lost $500. Or 500 McChickens or so. Kind of sad. So if the buyer or the bidder for your option is willing to pay you more than the intrinsic value for your option, it always makes sense to sell the option and close it instead of exercising and then selling the 100 shares at the market price. I'm not saying that it's a bad idea, I just don't like losing money, and I assume that you don't either. So in most cases, you probably don't want to exercise your option unless the buyer isn't willing to pay you more than the intrinsic value for your option, which again is the current market price minus the strike price for your option, for an in-the-money option. And for an out-of-the-money option, you absolutely do not want to exercise this. If you decide to do this, your option will literally become completely worthless. Since an out-of-the-money option has zero intrinsic value, it's made up entirely of extrinsic value. And remember, whenever you exercise an option, you're giving away all the extrinsic value in it. So whenever you exercise an out-of-the-money option, you're literally losing all of that money that you paid for your option, and also you're agreeing to either buy or sell 100 shares at a worse price than if you were to buy or sell at the market price. So with our example from earlier with XYZ, if it's trading at $95 and we bought a call option with a $100 strike price, we're agreeing to buy 100 shares of XYZ at $100 if we exercise it, and the market price is $95. So why would we buy 100 shares for $100 when we could buy them $500 cheaper buying them at $95? Make it make sense. That's about 500 McChickens that you'd be losing out on, and I'm sorry for bringing up McChickens. Maybe I'm just a little bit hungry in this video. Thanks for making it all the way to the end of this video, and thank you to all my patrons for the support. And as always, remember to stay positive, stay green. I'll catch you in the next one. Bye, guys.